Welcome back to the quick introduction to Python 3 for AWS Automation Engineers course. Today's video will demonstrate using the Boto3 library to manage AWS IAM policies, roles, groups, users, the instance profiles, and working with the IAM credentials report. To repeat our examples, you'll need Python 3 interpreter, AWS CLI tools, Boto3 module, and IDE. We'll be using Cloud 9 IDE in this video, but you can use your local IDE such as Visual Studio Code, IntelliJ IDEA, or even a text editor. AWS Identity and Access Management (IAM) is a web service that helps you manage security and control access to AWS resources. You use AWS IAM to control who can use your AWS resources, authentication, and what resources they can use, authorization. IAM is a global service, which means it is physically distributed and replicated worldwide. AWS IAM also supports federated identities, which enable you to give select users secure access to your resources without creating an IAM user for each person. When you create an IAM user, you specify a username and optionally enable multi-factor authentication for enhanced protection. After that, specify permissions, roles, and policies that you want to grant to the user. Additionally, AWS IAM allows you to manage AWS access keys and AWS secret access keys for every user in your AWS account. We're heavily relying on this feature when configuring access to AWS APIs for every user in the account. AWS IAM has everything you need to maintain access management to your AWS cloud resources, but your responsibility is to configure it right. You define how secure your access control procedures should be, how much you want to restrict users from accessing specific resources, how complex a password policy should be, or whether users should use multi-factor authentication, for example. To connect to Amazon IAM using Boto3 library from your Python script or Lambda function, you need to use the Boto3 client or Boto3 resource. Please check out the quick intro to Boto3 clients and resources video for more information about these options for working with AWS APIs using Boto3. To define a level of access to AWS service, you need to define an IAM policy. A policy is a JSON document that contains a set of rules defined in one or more statements. Each policy grants a specific set of permissions to AWS APIs and can be attached to one or more IAM identities, user, group, and role. There are two types of policies. The first is managed policy. It can be created and attached to multiple entities. AWS has several built-in managed policies that cover various use cases. You can assign many managed policies to IAM users, roles, or groups. You can also create your own managed policies according to your needs. The second one is inline policy. Such a policy is directly applied to IAM entities, users, or roles, and doesn't have distinctive ARNs. Inline policies cannot be reused. AWS recommends using managed policies instead of inline policies to standardize policies management and make them reusable. When working with IAM, you need to understand its terminology too. The identities are IAM resources that define users, groups, and roles. You can attach a policy to an IAM identity. The entities are objects that AWS uses for authentication, for example, IAM users or roles. And finally, principals are people or applications that use IAM users or roles in AWS accounts to make any actions or API calls. IAM policy allows or denies a set of actions to one or more principals on specific resources. There are two main categories of IAM policies. The identity-based policies answer the question, which API calls can this identity make to which resources? And resource-based policies that define which identities can perform which actions with me. To create an IAM policy, you need to use the create policy method of the Boto3 IAM client. The best way to define a policy is to use the Python dictionary. You can convert a defined policy to a string representation using the JSON dumps method afterward. The returned response object will contain additional information about the created policy. To get a list of all IAM policies available in your AWS account, you need to use the all method of the policies collection of the IAM resource. Please keep in mind that this method output might contain many policies in large AWS accounts. Alternatively, you can use the list policies method of the IAM client. In this example, we're using the getPaginator method because the list policies method limits the returned result to 100 policies by default. Finally, you can provide any arguments supported by the list policies method to the paginate method. We'll cover this in a minute in the filtering part of the video. To filter IAM policies available in your AWS account, you need to use the filter method of the policies collection of the IAM resource. This method allows you to filter by the following criteria. The scope: this is the policy scope, which might have the following values: all, AWS, and local. The only attached argument allows getting attached or detached policies. The path prefix argument searches policies by the common path prefix. And finally, the policy usage filter specifies the policy type, permissions policy or permissions boundary. In this example, we filter AWS permission policies by the common path prefix service role. To describe the IAM policy, you need to use the getPolicy method of the IAM client. This method accepts the policy ARN as an argument and returns the information about the specified managed policy in the form of a Python dictionary, including the policy's default version and the total number of IAM users, groups, and roles attached to that policy. To delete an IAM policy, you need to use the delete method of the policy class of the IAM resource. Keep in mind that before you can delete a managed policy, you must detach the policy from all associated users, groups, or roles. In addition, you must delete all policy versions using the delete policy version method. To attach an IAM policy to a role, you need to use the attach policy method of the role class of the Boto3 IAM resource. To detach the IAM policy from the role, you need to use the detach policy method of the role class of the IAM resource. That's it about managing the policies. Let's move to managing of IAM roles. The IAM role contains a set of permissions an IAM entity can perform and what other IAM entities, users or roles, can assume that role. A role is not directly linked to a person or a service. Rather, it can be assumed by any resource that the role grants permission to. Role credentials are always temporary and rotated periodically by the AWS Session Token Service, or AWS STS. Instead of assigning permissions to an IAM entity directly, roles allow an entity to be granted permissions temporarily, on an as-needed basis, to perform tasks. This enforces the least privilege principle, which is based on identity and time, as you can restrict entities to the minimum amount of access needed and the minimum amount of time needed to complete a task. A role is a principal and an identity in AWS simultaneously and has the primary purpose of granting temporary permissions to perform API calls in an account. Before using a role, the service, user, or another role must assume it. Each role has trust relationships that determine the entities that can assume the role. It also has a set of permissions that define which privileges entities get after they assume the role. To create an IAM role, you need to use the create role method of the IAM client. This method requires a role name and a policy document that defines who can assume or use the role. In this example, we create a role that can be assumed by the test user in our AWS account. As soon as the role is created, you can attach policies to the role so that whenever test user assumes the role, the user can have the required permissions. To list all IAM roles using Boto3, you need to use the all method of the roles collection of the IAM resource. To filter IAM roles, you need to use the filter method of the roles collection of the IAM resource. This method accepts the path prefix argument to filter the list of roles based on the role's prefix path. To describe the IAM role, you can use the getRole method of the IAM client. This method retrieves information about the specified role, including the role's path, GUID, RN, and the role's trust policy granting permission to assume the role. To delete the IAM role using Boto3, you need to use the delete method of the role class of the IAM resource. Please keep in mind that before deleting a role, you must detach all policies from it. Now, let's jump to IAM group management. An IAM group is a collection of users and permissions assigned to those users. Groups provide a convenient way to manage users with similar needs by categorizing them to their requirements. Then, you can manage permissions for all those users at once through the group. To create the IAM group, you need to use the create group method of the IAM client. To list IAM groups in your AWS account using Boto3, you need to use the all method of the group's collection of the IAM resource. The returned result will contain a collection of groups that can be iterated using a regular for loop. To filter IAM groups using Boto3, you need to use the filter method of the group's collection of the IAM resource. Similar to the roles and policies, IAM groups support filtering by path prefix. To describe IAM groups, you need to use the getGroup method of the IAM client. This method requires the group name as an argument. To delete the IAM group, you need to use the delete method of the group class of the IAM resource. You can provide your EC2 instances required permissions to access AWS resources without using API access keys by assigning them instance profiles. Instance profile provides a mechanism to assign an IAM role to an instance. To create an IAM instance profile, you need to use the create instance profile method of the IAM client, which requires the name of the instance profile as an argument. To add a role to the IAM instance profile, you need to use the add role method of the instance profile class of the IAM resource. To list IAM instance profiles, you need to use the all method of the instance profiles collection of the IAM resource. To filter IAM instance profiles, you need to use the filter method of the instance profiles collection of the IAM resource. Similar to the roles, policies, and groups, IAM instance profiles support filtering by path prefix. To describe the IAM instance profile, you need to use the getInstanceProfile method of the IAM client to retrieve the information about the specified instance profile, including the instance profile's path, GUID, RN, and role. To delete the IAM instance profile, you need to use the delete method of the instance profile class of the IAM resource. Before deleting IAM instance profile, you must remove the role from the instance profile first. Otherwise, you'll get the delete conflict exception Boto3 Python exception. In our example, we're handling this step for you. Ensure that you do not have any Amazon EC2 instances running with the instance profile you are about to delete. Deleting a role or instance profile associated with a running instance will break any applications running on the instance. To attach the IAM instance profile to the EC2 instance, you need to use the associate IAM instance profile method of the EC2 client. Quick note, you cannot associate more than one IAM instance profile with an EC2 instance. To detach the IAM instance profile from the EC2 instance, you need to use the describe IAM instance profile associations method of the EC2 client. As soon as an EC2 instance can have only one association at a time, you can filter the EC2 instance by the instance ID and get the first association from the associations list. For more information about EC2 instances management using Boto3, check the Working with EC2 Instances in Python using Boto3 video. An IAM user is an entity you create in AWS to represent the person or application that can interact with AWS services. To create an IAM user, you need to use the createUser method of the IAM client. To list all IAM users in the AWS account, you need to use the all method of the users collection of the IAM resource. To filter IAM users, you need to use the filter method of the users collection of the IAM resource. This method allows you to filter users by their path prefix. To describe the IAM user, you need to use the getUser method of the IAM client that retrieves information about the specified IAM user, including the user's creation date, path, unique ID, and ARN. If you do not specify a username, IAM will return the user information of the currently authenticated user. To delete an IAM user, you need to use the delete method of the user class of the IAM resource. Before deleting an IAM user, you must remove the following items first: user login profile, access keys, signing certificate, SSH public key, Git credentials, multi-factor authentication device, inline policies, attached managed policies, and group memberships. Please check out our supporting article or official Boto3 documentation for more information. To add the IAM user to a group, you need to use the add user method of the group class of the IAM resource. To remove the IAM user from a group, you need to use the remove user method of the group class of the IAM resource. To attach the IAM policy to the user, you need to use the attach policy method of the user class of the IAM resource. To detach the IAM policy from the user, you need to use the detach policy method of the user class of the IAM resource. To change the IAM user password, you need to use the change password method of the IAM client. Please pay attention that this operation allows you to change the user password and not to reset it. The account root user password is not affected by this operation. For more details, please check out the official AWS or Boto3 documentation. AWS API access keys are long-term credentials for IAM users. You can use access keys to get programmatic access to the AWS cloud by using the AWS CLI or AWS SDKs. To create IAM access keys, you need to use the Create Access Key method that creates new AWS access and secret access keys for the specified user. To list IAM access keys, you can use the List Access Keys method of the IAM client that returns information about the access key ID associated with the specified IAM user. To delete IAM access, you can use the Delete Access Keys method of the IAM client that deletes the access key pair associated with the specified IAM user. IAM login profile creates a password for the specified user and provides access to AWS services through the AWS Management Console. To create the login profile for the IAM user, you need to use the Create Login Profile method of the IAM client that creates a password for the specified IAM user. A password allows an IAM user to access AWS services through the Management Console. IAM Credentials Report lists all users in your account and the status of their credentials usage, including passwords, access keys, and MFA devices. Credential reports can assist you in auditing and compliance efforts. The report allows auditing credential lifecycle requirements, such as password and key rotation. You can provide the report to an external auditor or grant permission to an auditor to download the report directly. You can generate a credential report once every 4 hours. When you request a report, IAM first checks whether a report for the AWS account has been generated within the past 4 hours. If so, the most recent report is downloaded. If the most recent report for the account is older than 4 hours, or if there are no previous reports for the account, IAM generates and downloads a new report. To generate the IAM credentials report, you need to use the Generate Credential Report of the IAM client. To download the IAM credentials report, you need to use the Get Credential Report of the IAM client. The IAM credential report contains data in CSV format, and it's base 64 encoded, so you need to decode it to string. That's all we wanted to cover in this video. For more information about this topic, please check out the official AWS and Boto3 documentation. These resources are the most up-to-date sources of information. If you'd like to get more information about certain operations with AWS Identity Access Manager or any other AWS services using Python and Boto3 library, please let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and press the like button. This will help us to publish and spread more educational hands-on content related to cloud automation for the community. Thank you for your attention and stay tuned.